Welcome to Portals of Perception. This is David and Aviv in current openings. We actually recorded the entire episode 13 and realized right after we landed from that episode that we need to break it into 2 episodes. So this is welcoming you to episode 14, which is actually the second half of that journey from why develop yourself, which is what 13 became, to episode 14, current openings 14, looking at what does it mean to develop. What can people expect, David, as they come along for the ride with us into this 14? We typically record the opening on the front end. Now we know what just happened.
Yes. So something I would recommend is do watch episode 13 before watching this one. So if you haven't watched episode 13, it is highly recommended because this was actually, we started and we found that we continued our conversation for over an hour and a half, and therefore the wise thing was to break it into 2 parts. So do go back and watch 13 and then come with us in the journey into what now is episode 14. And I hope you enjoy the journey that we both enjoyed being on.
Indeed, it's a discovery into the dimensions of development through a contemplative loom that opens 5 development dimensions. Enjoy the discovery.
That has a surprise story ending. So do watch.
Yes, surprise. Do not miss the end and the story at the end. So when we talk about dimensions of care and love, the invitation is to become caretakers to ourselves, caretakers to the planet, for the planet, caretakers for humanity at large in the way the choices we make every day, caretakers for the opportunity of the universe at large in this unique place we call Earth, and therefore caretakers of future generations through the living choices and the kind of embodied choices we express every day. And that then presents an invitation for us to further the inquiry into what does it mean to develop. So in many ways, we could have stopped this episode here and do the next episode as a separate episode. We might choose editorially to do so. However, for now, we're going to proceed into this as one conversation and simply say that all that was a bridging from why develop yourself to what does it mean to develop. And what you already seeded for us is this idea that we can come at this inquiry through 3 layers of considerations. And I'm simply visualizing it so we can bring it along into the what does it mean to develop, because the invitation you made there was, well, it's a wise person choice to address the question and integrate all 3 levels. Yes. It's unhelpful to just say, I'm going to only hide inside the esoteric dimension. I'm going to leave out the mesoteric and the exoteric. It may feel, for a period of time, gratifying and illuminating, but you render yourself quite ineffective because you are essentially escaping engagement with your fellow humans, because we live in the exoteric world and we exchange mesoterically with others, and sometimes we are able to create moments or spaces or ecologies where we can enter esoteric depth. So, and I'm just using it here again as a bridging to the next series of explorations. Is there anything you want to say here, or shall we carry this as is to the next pathway of the exploration.
I would come alongside you to highlight the integration of the three, that it's not to focus on one to the exclusion of the other two, because we would need to have, to be effective, we need an integrated development through the three dynamics. So really just simply to come alongside and reinforce that. Yeah.
And another time in the future, we will come back to this and we will make that point and we will prove it through relationships. Because it's quite ineffective to think you're going to simply build your relationship only at an esoteric level. I mean, you can, but let's say you live with somebody. By definition, you're living through all dimensions. You're not just living esoterically. There is a mesoteric and exoteric dimension to life. I'm living in a house. The house is an exoteric expression of the mesoteric and the esoteric actualities that we cultivate and bring to life here. So something to come back to in the future by way of reflecting on this to the dimension of relationships. So as we proceed, well, you reflected on that quite a bit when you said the U, the O, and the I, the exterior, the mid-space, the interior. You could think about exoteric development as horizontal and esoteric as vertical, even though even that description is too one-dimensional, because there are ways to look at them both. So this is just a starter seeding of the contemplation. With this, we nevertheless want now to bring 5 additional dimensions of development to explore what does it mean to develop. And here again, I propose that we take them one at a time, and then we play in this playground of development with those 5 dimensions together. And the first that presented itself is the idea of skills. What does it mean to develop? Well, one dimension of development is you can develop skills. Often that will be looked at as horizontal development. But there again, it's limiting because there are horizontal and vertical development skills. So I'm about to bring 3 dimensions to each of the 5 major dimensions of development and ask you to play jazz with these. So the first is specific skills. So if you're a gardener, or if you're a chef, or if you're a musician, if you may have specific skills with the drum or with the trumpet, or you may, if you're a chef, you may focus on Italian dishes. You may develop specific skills. Then there are also transferable skills. When I do coaching with managers and leaders and executives, especially when I coach people earlier in their career, I encourage them, you enter a certain role, a certain domain, by all means develop the specific skills. Make sure you use the opportunity to develop transferable skills. What are transferable skills? Well, how do you manage yourself under stress? How do you manage yourself when you are facing a complex project? The fact that you can chunk a project to smaller bites. These are transferable skills. They will become relevant in many different life situations. And then there are meta skills. Well, so listening can become meta skill. Facilitative skills can become meta skills. Meta skills because in which we mean these are overarching skills inside of which there are variety of specific skills, and they make and enable you to enter different requirements and different needs, and those meta skills become tremendous assets in those different domains of requirement. And you could choose literally any focus area in life, any domain, and if you're a teacher, there are the specific skills that will becomes central when you need to teach mathematics or history. But then there are transferable and meta skills about how to engage students in the process of learning. So this is me offering just a starter exploration into dimension one, which is skills as what you can do. What comes alive for you about skills as the first dimension of development we are exploring here?
I think to take a specific and run it through, working with 3 levels: esoteric, mesoteric, exoteric, and to take a domain that we all have some familiarity with. There's a number we could choose, but I'm thinking of mathematics. And before some folks go, oh, I love math, and others go, oh, I don't like math. But just get away from existing habits and thoughts about math, and the idea that you needed to be trained in how to work in the realms of trade. And almost all people in North America can make change. Can get a dollar bill and buy something and get change and check the change. That would be the exoteric of math, enough math to get by. The mesoteric of math, which is where you then get to, and that would be transferable, of course, in relation to, but I'll just stay with that exoteric skill. There's the basic ability to work with math, to trade. The next level would be more the mesoteric, which is where you get people working with calculus and working with, I met a professor of accounting, right? And that's very high level, working with dual sheet bookkeeping and able to do marvelous magical things with numbers within the current understanding of numbers as an accounting principle. The esoteric would look at numbers quite differently and would look at numbers as principles of creation. And at that level would say, well, 1 and 1 does not make 2. And it would completely take a different approach to either the exoteric or the mesoteric, because it would say, number 1 is representing a rod, which is a masculine principle. Number 2 is representing a cup, which is a feminine principle. You bring the 2 together, the 1 and 2 combine, they produce 3, which is a third power, which is more than the sum of 1 and 2. And then would look at number 4 as a cyclical process representing cycles. And so this is looking at numbers as representing energies or powers. And briefly, you could take the same with language, which we started to do, which is learning enough language to be able to ask for a particular thing that you want or need, which is learning nouns. Please I want a banana, I want a cup of coffee, this kind of thing. Very basic vocabulary for street level. Mesoteric level, you'll get a person dressing up, having a broader vocabulary, larger terms of reference. Like a professor has to have a lot to profess. So that's why they're a professor. So they might use what seem to be longer words, which is meant to be words that better describe an energy. But you get to the esoteric, and every letter has a particular significance, a particular meaning. And we understand that spelling is connected to the idea of casting a spell. And you can use language to cast a spell whereby it's spellbinding, and an energy appears that sits with the language and people are spellbound by it. That would be going from we could say the U level, the exoteric, to the O level, the mesoteric, to the I level, which would be more the esoteric. And interesting how those 3 letters together, produce an IOU, or also the word, I think in French it's oui, meaning yes. So there's lots to look at. I spent years looking at the inner legends, as they're also called, or characters of the alphabet. And one of the greatest system of runes on the planet, people go, I'm studying the Scandinavian runes. You want to find a powerful set of runes, go and buy a Scrabble set. It's got some of the most powerful runes you can work with. When you look at each letter having a mystical property, an energetic property or power. So there's 2 looms in response to looms. The loom of mathematics and the loom of language, and they have these different levels in them.
And so you led us here into appreciating exoteric, mesoteric, and esoteric skills through numbers and letters in the language. And that brings us to the second main dimension we want to explore here. So if skills are about what you can do, when you enter a role or when you enter a domain, it's about what you can serve or what you are serving. Okay, so if you become a leader, you are serving a certain domain that you're leading. If you are a teacher, you're serving the domain of the classroom. If you are a gardener, you're serving the domain of the garden. And there again, we are saying that there is a way of developing skills, and then there is a way of developing in the way you show up in a role as you serve a domain. At the foundational level, you facilitate a domain. You enter a living domain and you facilitate it. So if you are a nurse, you develop the capacity to see where the need is and to respond in a facilitative way to the need. If you are a teacher, you are there to facilitate the learning process for students, and teachers in this day and age recognize that you can't do teaching now the way you did teaching 20 or 30 years ago, because there are those technological developments, and so it's more about how you curate a learning experience that integrates all that becomes available now. So that's about facilitating a domain. And then as you serve the domain, there are moments and times where it's insufficient to just facilitate what is. You need to regenerate, replenish, renew a domain to a whole new level. And sometimes as you are in a role of a teacher or a counselor or a therapist or any other role where you are serving, again, I'll go back to the two I'm using, gardener and a teacher, you may need to create a whole new garden. You may need to, as a teacher, create a new classroom experience. For example, integrate two subjects that were never integratable before, but this moment in time demands that you integrate brain science and theology. So you will investigate the impact of advanced states and religious protocols, devotional protocols, in the way they impact brain plasticity, and you'll use modern technology to image it. And so you'll be creating and evolving a new domain, as there can be so many others. What would you offer to this idea of developing through a role or through a domain?
I would simply come alongside with the idea that each one, as we move from left to right, calls for more of you. So if you're facilitating a domain, you've got a blueprint which is already there, and you're conforming and repeating that blueprint. If you're renewing it, you've taken something, but now you need to add extra energy to it to renew it. So it's over and above facilitating. To create and evolve a domain is going to call for greater participation mentally, emotionally, and physically. So as we go from left to right, the amount of energy input and mental and emotional input, both of which are energies, increase. So that would be what I'd highlight there, really.
Yeah, again, so beautiful, because you are describing already how by engaging in a certain role and a certain domain, serving a domain, the development of a domain, you may have a delicious opportunity to develop a character. So I'm proposing developing skills was developing what you can do. Developing inside a role in a domain, it was about developing what you serve. When you develop your character, you're again moving a little bit more inside, in the interior. And it's not that you disappear in the interior, because often the best way to develop character is actually to be in service of the larger ecology you are serving. And so I'm proposing that character in this is developing what you are or developing what you are becoming, or both. Yeah. And so here I'm going to offer, again, interesting 3 starters. The first place I will go to is the idea of standards. You develop your standards, and standards in that sense define what you won't go below. And thinking how to best instantiate it and bring it to life occurred to me that I might need to explain it's not the 5, that's left from an earlier slide, but it's the bull market principle. Never mind, the 5 bull market. The bull market principle, you can tell that I've created these slides this morning just before our recording, and I said, yeah, let's talk about the bull market principle and the development journey. This is a riddle I've enjoyed offering some time to executive teams to make the bridge from their economical thinking to their business thinking and to their personal development thinking. So I say to people, what do you think define bull markets? So sooner or later, usually sooner, somebody says, well, bull market means we've got higher prices. And I say, yeah, it's right, but it's an incomplete answer. It's an incomplete answer because the technical definition of a bull market is a little more detailed. And I then explain that here we have an example of a chart that shows higher highs, but it's not a bull market. The reason you know it's not a bull market because it also demonstrates that it has lower lows, right? So that asset, whatever it is, a commodity or a stock of a company, is producing higher highs, but is also producing lower lows, and therefore you cannot technically say that it's in a bull market. In a minute, we'll see how critical that is in relation to keeping your standards or developing your standards. This would legitimately be a bull market because we are seeing higher highs and there is a line in the sand. We never go below a certain standard. We never lose that ground. In the metaphoric terms we use, your lower points, the line below which you will never go, your standards, is unbroken. True bull markets are defined as higher highs, and also higher lows. So often people think about the development journey and they will go to describe their peak experience. Oh, I've experienced a non-dual illumination. I've experienced an ecstatic state. Okay, that's wonderful. The peak experiences are wonderful, both at an individual level and at a communal level. The trueness of one's development and one's character is more clearly defined by the point below which we never go. In concretizing this, David, a little more, I'd say that if 10 years ago I got upset and it took me a day to recover, and a few years later it took me half a day to recover, and today I can bounce forward, not bounce back, but bounce forward from being upset within hours or minutes, that's an example of higher lows. And I'm inviting the suggestion that the measure of our character and the measure of our development is often not in the high points, but rather in producing higher lows. And when you see a chart in the market of any asset making higher lows alongside higher highs, you know that you're in a genuine bull market. So all that I'm offering to standards as one way to develop your character. Do you want to make any comment on this, or should I first bring the next 2 elements of character development?
Yeah, I think bring the next 2, Aviv.
Okay, well, so this next dimension is about values. It's about how congruent you are with what matters for you. Maybe earlier in life, we declare certain values as important for us, but perhaps we've written those in our journals, and then as we go about our day-to-day business, there is a gap between what we set as intentions to how we live those values. And as we deepen the values and become the embodiment of these values, we build our characters together with the virtues we choose to cultivate, the qualities we choose to nurture. Churchill said, and somebody likely have said it before him, and then others said it after him, that the first of all virtues is courage, because without courage, because all other virtues will require courage in the first place. So, to live a virtuous life, to live a life that is congruent to its chosen values, to live a life that works softly, not just hardly, but softly, to not go below the standards that we set for ourselves, is a way to embrace the idea of character development. And what we are already suggesting here in the integration is that by serving the domains of your choice, you'll sometime find the best practice arena for character development. Say you become a counselor, you are about to encounter struggle and pain and grief, and these qualities you talked about earlier, David, sense of care and generosity, you're going to be called by the service of that domain that involve other people. You're going to be tested time and again to become those intentions, to become those values, to become those virtues. So say something to build on this idea of character as the third dimension of development here.
I think the feature of self-determination is very big, because that's very crucial if a person is going to become the person they want to be, if they're going to take a hand in their own development. So a person can get turned out to be something by life, which means that life in a way has brought them into a certain channel and caused them to be a certain way. But the person that stands out with that virtue and the values as you describe it is a person who's self-determined and decided to be a certain way. So they put the power of their own decision behind it. I'm struck with the relationship between the word virtue and the word vice, because this back in medieval times, you'd have your vices and virtues, the seven vices, the seven virtues that play off against each other. And the difference being that a vice is something that grips a person. I don't think of it as a person having a vice. I think of it as a vice having a person, like compulsive gambling or compulsive behavior. In terms of psychology, they'll talk about compulsive behavior. Well, that's to do with an energy and a certain habit dictating how a person is. And very often that's not by person is then trying to let go of that vice. That's where they would talk about a novice or a novice back in the monastery or the nunnery, like they'd have a year to discover if they've got no vice. But it wasn't to discover if the person had a vice, it was to discover if there was a compulsive behavior they couldn't let go of. So a character is then about building and creating the person that you choose to be at exoteric, mesoteric, and esoteric level. So it then involves ethics, principles, studying morality, considering what real morality may actually be. Like you said, it's a one-year course, because the fact that you can go to, say, a bar in Florida where I live and say, I want to buy everybody a drink, and people go, hooray, cheerful, that's great. But you go to a place in an Islamic country and you say, I want to buy everyone a drink, and you're in a lot of trouble. You know, it's like there's different, I call them false, there's moralities in different countries which are operating according to different cultures, but they're not based on a real human morality that would apply across the board to everybody. So I think character involves actually going inside oneself and coming to one's own views. So it's not hearsay, it's not hearing what someone says and saying it, it's coming to one's own values, what matters for you, as you say there, and then deciding what qualities you want to nurture. And it's a conscious decision. Whether it be high, middle, or low, the person is making a conscious decision that that's what they want. And that, to me, is a primary driver in character.
Indeed, in that is the sense of self-authoring, as you describe, that the power of self-determination. And that brings us to the fourth dimension of development we're exploring here, which is the idea of perspective. So character was what you are, perspective is what you appreciate or what you can appreciate. Indeed, in most developmental circles, they will actually define development through this one line, and we are proposing that as one dimension of development. And by the way, we're not producing here anything comprehensive. You just mentioned a minute ago ethics and morality. Yes, so, and which can be viewed as a subset of character, but I could easily draw here another line that would be the development of morality and ethics, and it will represent a whole developmental line by itself. However, to stay for a minute with perspective, what we are suggesting, proposing here as a starter place is first, well, as you said, first reception and perception. What is it you can comprehend in the first place? Well, so often when perspective is looked at as the lens of development, it is talked about in the idea of first perspective, second perspective, third perspective, fourth, fifth, and sixth. Let me just bring that to life. Okay, so first perspective is I am looking at what I'm now seeing. I'm seeing David on the screen. That's the perspective, the first person perspective. The second perspective is, can I integrate? Well, integrate is going to be further on this line in a minute, but can I perceive in the first place what it is David is seeing when David is looking back at me? That would be a second person perspective. A third person perspective would be if we had a third person here, or let's imagine that we have a third person here, and that person is looking at how David is looking at Aviv, and my capacity to perceive that the third person perspective and perception of how David looks at Aviv, that would be my capacity to integrate, or to perceive again first and then to integrate a third person perspective. The fourth perspective would be, can I actually zoom or soar above it and see those three perspectives inside the bigger cosmology of the interaction, see that they are operating inside a certain ecology. David, Aviv, the subject matter, and the third person, there is a complex system that develops a complex ecology. The capacity to appreciate the ecology would be a fourth person perspective. The fifth person perspective would be to actually place that complex ecology inside an even broader, let us say, as we said earlier, all planetary ecology. So you'd appreciate, you'd perceive initially, then appreciate, then integrate the place, the significance of that small ecology inside its greater ecology. And then you can go all the way to fifth and sixth perspectives by integrating the universe at large. It becomes something that needs to be more explored through the feeling life, or else it becomes an intellectual game. So that's what's important here. This is why, to make sure that it's not a mental, intellectual thing, first, can I perceive these different perspectives? Second, can I empathize? Can I develop empathy to truly embrace what they feel inside their experience? And if I can do that, can I then integrate to embody that dimension? And the development line of perspective is the tasking is often not just to conceptually develop the mental perceptive capacity, but to truly expand the range. Okay? So I was born in Israel, I now live in the US. You were born in the Welsh country? It's part of the...
in the Midlands of Britain.
In the middle of Britain. And you now live in the US, so we each bring the perspective of the place we were raised in and the place where we find ourselves today. Well, can I, in my appreciation, include and integrate the perspective of people from as many places and as many backgrounds, with as many desires, with as many wishes, with as many inner configurations? The simple answer to no, because I'm still in the developing journey. I'm aspiring to develop the capacity to perceive, empathize, and be able to integrate. Increasingly so along this perspective line of development. So how is this meeting you, this exploration of the perspective dimension? What is it bringing up for you as a development dimension?
I think a fairly simple perspective, but one that may help to catch this, which is your views determine how you view things. So how you view determines what you view and what you actually perceive. So your preconceptions determine your perceptions. So if a person's got printed with certain views in their neuroplasticity, in their mind, then they're going to see things according to their pre-existing views. So if we want to expand our views, we need to expand our views, which can sound like a truism, but they actually, expanding our ability to view from inside means that we can actually receive more and view more that's in the universe around us. So our views determine our views.
Yeah, your koan simply says that we cannot see anything, we cannot view anything without something inside us in the first place that can recognize those things. That's why our views determine our views, or our views determine what we can view and perceive. Well,
we can see that also in the word perspect, like in perspective, because spect is to see. So per is through. So we have a perspect according to the eyes that we're seeing through. And that's determined by the inner configurations that we have. So we do control through our character, through what we serve, and through our skills, going back up the loom, what we're then able to appreciate. So development brings with it greater appreciation by the fact of that increasing range. I'd say the range of development, increasing the range of development increases the range of perception.
So often when we proceed from a fourth dimension to a fifth dimension, it feels like a non-linear transition, because indeed there is a there is a non-linear leap from the fourth development line to the fifth. So I think you will like and appreciate the leap we're about to make. I'm proposing that we think of connections as what it is you are tethered to, what it is you're connected to, as a way to appreciate an additional dimension of development, and possibly as a way to help us connect this explorative, contemplative, meditative way of inquiring into what does it mean to develop, where in this case we are proposing that when you endeavor, going again with the idea of you are a healer, okay? You took the role of the healer and you're working into the healing domain, and you developed specific skills and transferable and meta healing skills, and you endeavor to facilitate the domain, and then you endeavor to renew and evolve the domain. Well, in the first place, you go to the places that can recharge your battery. It may be the person, it may be the community, it may be the ecology that recharges for you the healing battery, such that you can work as a healer or as a teacher or as a leader or as any of those roles. And then as you endeavor for a while, you discover that there may be a way for you to develop the capacity to connect to source. Not like with a battery, but have your own connective by sentiment, by feeling, by character formation, by perspective, by skills, by domain capabilities. All of the above enable you to connect to the source that powers you inside whatever it is that you are seeking to do. And this is where, for example, the aspect of standards becomes very important, because the source has its own integrity and intactness. So it is likely to be more stable in its connection when you can be trusted, when you are a high fidelity character for source. And when you become high fidelity character for source, by which I mean, you won't go below the standards that you set yourself up. And the idea of standards become very important when we serve a domain, because then we're no longer just setting the standards according to the person we're choosing to become, but we also embrace the standards of the domain, whether it is a teaching or counseling or healing, any of those domains. All of that work enable you to more effectively connect to source, to ultimately look to find a circumstance where you may be adopted by source. So adopted by source to mean whether, again, you are working as a facilitator of a domain of knowledge, or whether you are in the domain of healing. And we often see this more in the arts, where a certain genius inhabits or is expressed through a certain person. The thing there, it often has, and in history often appeared with a bit of a freakish side to it, rather than a developmental journey that made that safe. So you have somebody who is adopted by a certain muse, but actually they are a jerk to anybody and everybody around them, which is why the line that you integrated earlier, the line of morality, the line of ethics, the line of you as a stable, safe agent to the people around you, all those things, they are important dimensions if you are to become connected to source and be adopted by source. So that's as a way of prodding and probing what does it mean to develop, not by way of looking to provide answers, but by way of looking to open pathways into the contemplation. What's arising for you, David, either to the line of connection or to the full contemplation together?
Well, I think that feature adopted by Source, that very much fits with the journey of from development to envelopment, actually becoming enveloped by something. And I think to take an example of a practical process from world history, but I think it's very indicative, which is in the time of the Knights of King Arthur and the Round Table, there would be a so-called a steward, that is somebody who's not yet a knight. And if they're a squire, that was the name, a squire. And if they are to become a knight, part of their transition was they needed to do what was called a vigil. And it was a night vigil. So through the hours of the night, a night watch. And what they would do was they would take a shield, which was there to be their shield, and they would have placed upon it what they called a charge, which is very interesting because a charge speaks about an electrical charge. So they put a charge upon the field, which was what they called it, of the shield. So you got a shield with what was called a field and then a charge of whatever nature. And then the squire, the would-be knight, would contemplate that shield all through the night. And the shield was meant to represent the energy that the knight was going to represent. So if you look into the history of the Knights of King Arthur, they say that this particular knight represented courage. This particular knight represented honor. This particular knight represented, let's say, healing. So they had these different attributes, which were energetic qualities that they represented. And they would contemplate, so this is them making a connection. They would contemplate that until they became tethered to it, to take that language. And that, so they were sending out a signal, and then there was something that responded and joined them. And then they would become a knight, a K knight, someone who's watching and working through the night. They'd done their vigil. And a very, very interesting way that they would do that would they would dub them, which means that they'd take a sword and they'd touch one shoulder, bring it up over the head to the other shoulder, bring it up over again. They do it 3 times. I actually saw this once in the British court. I saw someone being dubbed, and they did it 3 times. It was a thrice thing. And then they're meant to have become adopted. They're then meant to be representing that quality. So wherever they go, that quality goes with them. And then they'd say, oh, Sir Gawain, he was a courageous knight, or so-and-so was an honorable knight. Or you had the dark side, and they said, oh, so-and-so was like on the dark side of the force kind of thing. And that's how they represented it. But it worked through a process of creating a connection.
Yes.
And that was the nature of it. And then if the knight kind of fell on hard times in the questing, there's always that idea the knight goes on a quest and hits all kinds of trouble, gets quested and tested. Then the knight could look at his shield, call over that charge, and reconnect to source. And that would then give them the ability to sort of have what one of the knights was, he had the strength of 10 because his heart was pure, right? I think that was, I don't know, I don't remember which one, but one of them anyway. But it was that idea. And interesting, you take the word source, and then you get the idea of having resources, which is the ability to revisit source and bring it back again. So they had then the shield would represent their symbol by which they could resource themselves. That was their resource. So I thought, give a story example.
Yeah.
May help.
Yes, beautiful. Because so in the story of the initiatory journey of a knight to become a knight, they've had to acquire the skills and enter the domain that they have chosen to serve as their specification. And through this, they develop the character and indeed those attributes that you spoke to. And when they endeavor to embody, say, courage or honor, they will go into life and test the courage or honor or generosity through different perspectives to see whether they can still be indeed that courageous person they aspire to be in variety of different theaters and circumstances. So it's not an idea, but rather it is truly an embodied integration, such that ultimately, because they have developed that foundation, they are connected to Source, potentially they are adopted by Source. So that brings us to the contemplation of today, with really the wonder of what would be the equivalent today. Where is the round table of the Knights of the Round Table of today? Well, they are possibly showing up all over the planet in and through simple human beings who are endeavoring to, in the face of confusion and chaos, make the higher choices of living, to do the different lines of development in their life in the way they choose, because there are as many configurations to develop through and with as there are people on the planet. And what we endeavored today to do was to simply offer some pathways into the broader contemplation of what does it mean to develop. And we followed the loom in a particular way. It's just one way. Anyone could actually enter the loom at any one of those portal points and get to the entire hologram, the entire configuration of their own development journey through skill, through a domain, through any of those dimensions, perspective, and so on. So a rich, as we said, year-long curriculum in one call, but this was number 13, so we anticipated that it was going to have to be packed.
Yeah. Maybe it's the rebirth of Camelot.
Indeed. Well, let's see what shows up with us on the next current openings when we come together again on the next episode. Thank you, David.
Thanks, Aviv. One last thing, which is that the process of tethering, as we said, it worked differently, but both with knights and ladies, but in a different fashion. So I think that's something important to say about the court, that it was not, we looked at the example of the knight because that's the example that best fitted what we're speaking about, but there was equivalent development with the ladies of the court, and indeed the whole idea of knights and ladies was to encompass the development of the entire human dynamic, the entire human race.
And what you just demonstrated is the present awareness of the perspective line of development, which was that if we left out and did not integrate the perspective of the lady line of development right next to the knights, then something in the communication here would be out of balance, incomplete. So we are better off by you making sure that that perspective is integrated. Now, have we integrated all the perspectives? No, because we are making a starter. We're never claiming to be complete or perfect. I appreciate very much that you're catching us in that last tail end and saying, hold on a minute, the knights without the ladies of the court is not just an incomplete picture, it's a picture that could not survive and certainly could not thrive.
Yes, exactly. The court could not be there without both. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Aviv. Hey, bye for now. See you in 14.
Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.